Hey everybody, what is up? Welcome back to Funnel Trade. So I made a video a couple weeks ago talking about how if we want standard fixed, we're going to have to fix it ourselves. And I am probably not the person to fix it, but I certainly have some ideas that hopefully some people in the community who have more reach than I do will take and run with and refine and turn into something that the community can organically get behind, absence of WotC, and fix standard. Because magic without standard doesn't have a terribly long future ahead of it. Now, many years, it could go maybe, 3, 4, 5 years, but you really want standard there because it feeds everything else and because it's a lifeline to the entire ecosystem. And it's good for everyone involved if standard is healthy. So, in that video a couple weeks ago, I had said that basically maybe an idea for fixing standard is you go back to you well first you turn it into a player run format. You just pick WotC out of it, you turn it into a player run format, you go back to a 2-year rotation, you kick out the universes beyond that increasingly more and more people dislike, and you make some other small changes around the edge. Because the problem that standard is having is that as it has grown from historically 7 to 12 expansions being standard legal at any given time to now being, golly, we're at the point where eventually we're going to be at what, 25 standard legal expansions at once. You cannot balance it. It cannot be balanced. And as you grow the pool of cards that are legal in a format, the number of viable decks shrinks because the number of outlier powerful combos that are possible increases. And so you shrink that number of viable decks, you make it less fun. And there was an interesting thing that, again, those guys on Distraction Makers, I keep going back to them because they have such great ideas. Um, Something they talked about recently was that possibly a theory for why WotC has gone to this 4 to 6 week release cadence for major releases is that the tools and the theories behind solving the meta are better than they have ever been. And you can't put that rabbit back in the hat. Those tools will only refine more and more in the future. And so those guys were postulating that maybe part of the reason WotC has had to go to such frequent releases is because the brewers and the people who attempt to solve the meta have gotten so good at it. The theory of how to solve the meta has gotten so refined that you have to release more and more often in order to give them something to chew on. And so if we could somehow get back to both a smaller pool of cards, but also changing that pool more often, then we could revitalize standard. And if we could get Bagels and Schmear out of standard, get Spider-Man out of standard, get all the ridiculous universes beyond out of standard, that would help too. So that was the idea that I had a couple weeks ago. And recently, Professor made a video about, I don't remember if it was standard specifically or one of the other recognized WotC sanctioned formats, and decrying that, it's gone to pot and things are terrible. And I love Professor, and 95% of things having to do with magic, he and I would probably agree on. But, Professor is a guy who will sit there and lament what is wrong and simply plead with WotC to throw him a life preserver instead of using his own damn legs to just swim to the shore. And so I am going to somewhat refine in this video my original recommendations for how we might save standard, show you some information that I've come up around it, some of the actual calculations of what would this do if we implemented some of these rules. And again, don't take these as what must be the final answer to how a community built standard alternative could work. It's simply a place to start. And again, I'm hoping that someone out there who I've probably never even heard of is going to take this and say, you know what? I have the initiative, I have the reach, I have the desire to do all of this and to try and push this. Okay? So let's get into it. And what I'm going to show you here is my spreadsheet that I have made of how this would work. So if we say, what is the release day of these expansions, the upcoming ones also, and for these two way out here in 2026, I just put the 10th of the month. Right now, WotC has not refined what day of the month they are releasing on yet. They have only told us April and October respectively. And then I said, what if we implemented a rotation date for expansions that was 2 years after they're released, and then the first day of the following month after that. And here's what you get. So on January 1st of 2026, you would have 8 legal expansions. They would be these ones. And this version of standard would go for 22 days until you get to January 23rd, when Lorwyn Eclipsed releases. And so then you would have 9 legal expansions in the standard pool. And again, we've thrown out Universes Beyond and we've gone back to a 2-year rotation. And that's how we reduce the number of expansions that are in the pool back down to something close to the historical norm. And then this version of standard would go for 37 days until you get to March 1st. And March 1st is when Murders of Karlov Manor turns 2 years and then the first day of the next month old and falls off the rotation. You'd be back down to 8 sets. And so I've gone ahead and I've just gone out and said all the way through until December 1st, and that version of standard would persist until the end of the year. And so what we see from this is that over the course of 2026, you would have 9 different pools of cards that are legal and standard. You'd get your 3 universes within releases during the year. You'd have several of the older expansions drop out of legality. And by the end of the year, you would be at 6 sets. Now, remember that when we were back on the 3-set block format into the early and let's say late 2000s, we would have 2 blocks that were legal at a time. Sometimes if we were coming up to that September rotation time period, we'd have a 3rd block that was legal, and then we would have a core set. And so we might have 10 expansions. And at the lower end, we would have 2 blocks plus a core set, which would be about 7. And so you get back to those kind of historical numbers of expansions being legal after you drop a few of these off, and we wrangle with the fact that WotC will be releasing fewer universes within expansions because they're releasing more Universes Beyond expansions. And this also helps you with the other part, which is you get 9 different card pools over the course of the year. And so you have time to brew, you have time to let some of those pools mature more than others. And so you see one here that would stretch over the summer, basically from May 1st until the end of August. You have 123 days. And so this one would become the most mature. You'd have the most, say, churn within it, because you'd have the most time for some decks to rise to the top, for responses to those decks to be made, and so on. And then you have this pool here, which would go from October 1st to October 10th, only 9 days inclusive. And, the interesting thing about that is if you had some people who were really go-getters and really wanted to work hard on solving the problem, maybe they could go out and in that 9-day period, which would include at least one weekend, they could go and get a tournament win on something very innovative that they came up with very quickly, for which not many responses had been found and certainly not matured to the point to respond to it directly in a tournament setting. And so this is kind of the basis of where if you implement the 2-year rotation, you kick out Universes Beyond, you let the pool of legal sets shrink back down to something more historically normal, you'll get more variety in decks, and you still maintain turning up the pool of cards that are legal in standard often enough. You do it, in fact, 9 times here over the course of 2026 is what this would look like. Now, this does not happen in a vacuum. It's not simply that you could get some person in the community who likes this idea to throw their weight behind it and Viola, everything's solved, standard is fixed forever. It's now a player-run version of standard that would exist in the same universe as the WotC run version. There are pros and cons to this, and I've listed some things down here. The pros, obviously, first, no universes beyond, because, well, more and more people dislike universes beyond as it goes on. There are still a lot of people who are neutral and just don't really care either way. In fact, the more interested you are purely in gameplay, the less universes beyond will bother you at all. But the number of people who just don't care and are positive about universes beyond, that is shrinking. And the second pro, as I've said, you massively shrink the pool of cards that are legal. You churn the pool often enough, and you churn it on irregular time spans. So where WotC is saying, hey, let's go to this 4 to 6 to occasionally 8 week release cycle, here we have on one cycle you had 4 months, and on another cycle you had merely 9 days. Uh, you can manage the ban list, and I have this as a pro and a con. You can manage the ban list in that if you had some people who were interested in running this, who were capable of getting some consensus around themselves that they should be the managers of the ban list the way the old Commander Rules Committee was before it surrendered and dissolved, then they could do things like go out and fix VV Cauldron much faster than WotC is willing to fix it. Now, on the con side, you have to manage the ban list. And part of the problem with this is you can generally probably start with what the WotC ban list is, but maybe move a little faster. You can do things a little differently, but sometimes you'll be faced with these questions of what if you have a combination of cards that is format warping, and one of them is Universes Beyond, and so it's not legal in this player run version of Standard. Do you still ban the other one? I don't know. You have to solve some difficult problems around that. There will be a somewhat jarring transition for people who contemplate moving into this format because a bunch of cards they thought were going to be standard legal for 3 or 5 years will be banned much more quickly. They will rotate out of legality much more quickly in this player run version of Standard. One of the biggest problems is who will dare give it tournament support? Because your Card Kingdoms and your Channel Fireballs, they will not dare to touch something like this. And without money behind it, without enough vigor from the community, and without some kind of tournament support, this would remain simply a local store level thing. Now, maybe it's a thing that a lot of local stores would be interested in doing, interested in supporting, and working into their normal tournament rotation, Friday nights, etc. Possibly bring Standard back to a lot of local stores that have had to give it up because it's such an unpopular format right now. And maybe it would have to stay there. And that would definitely be a con because you would essentially have zero network. And that network is kind of encapsulates the tournament support issue and growing beyond the local store. It's all a network problem because you have to try to figure out how to make it popular enough that enough people want to come into this player run version of Standard, be a part of it, make it grow, make it popular, help it spread. But if there are people in the community who get behind it, can refine the ideas that I have, that by no means do I think should be the final version of it, simply a starting point to think about. If you can get people behind it and get it moving, you can maybe get Standard back to a healthy spot where it is the beating heart of competitive Magic and of local play and tournament play, where it really needs to be. Because on the long timeline, not having a functional Standard format, which, to be honest, is where we are now. To not have a functional Standard format is very bad for the game in the long term. And WotC is not going to fix it no matter how many videos Professor makes pleading with them. The people at WotC who would like to fix it do not have the political power within the company to actually force those changes through. That's where we are. And if we as players of Magic want to have Standard be viable and want to have it remain a healthy part of growing Magic into the future, maybe we have to save it ourselves. maybe we have to use our own 2 feet to swim to the shore. Let me know what you think, guys. I'm interested in your feedback, any ideas you have. And, if this is an interesting idea to you, even if you disagree with my exact implementation, send the video to some other people you think might think it's interesting also, because the more this idea spreads, the more it can get some kind of buzz around it and generate some at least discussion, then the better the chance of the right people running with this idea and taking it somewhere fruitful. Let me know what you think, guys. Thanks to everyone who makes this content possible, especially my very generous supporters on Patreon. Like, comment, share, and subscribe, and join me on Final Trade.